Hi, it's Michelle. I hope you've been enjoying In This Family as much as I have. There have been so many fascinating guests with such varied life experiences. We have so many more great people lined up, and we are getting ready to share their powerful stories. We're going to take a short spring break, and we've picked some of our favorite episodes for you to hear again, or maybe for the first time. I talk to people about mental health all the time, and depression is often at the forefront and continues to be a reality that people have to manage. And for this reason, I'd like to go back to our very first episode with the brilliant comedian Gary Gulman. Enjoy. Welcome to In This Family. I'm Dr. Michelle K. Murray, the president and CEO of Nexus Family Healing. I'm also a licensed marriage and family therapist and your host for this program. When one person in a family is dealing with mental health challenges, the whole family is dealing with mental health challenges. While it's important to look at the effect of a mental health condition on an individual, it's also important to look at the ripple effect that the symptoms have on the whole family. To heal and build positive coping skills, it's important to understand the genetic, environmental, societal, and familial factors that influence how mental health is manifested. Specifically, mental health-related behaviors can be exacerbated by the family, while family members can also hurt when their loved ones are suffering. That's what we're talking about here. The better somebody understands their mental health journey in relation to their family, the better they can prepare themselves to break negative cycles in the creation of their future family. Families can also be a powerhouse for healing and recovery. This program features honest and candid conversations about family dynamics and mental health. We'll bring you a variety of perspectives and raw experiences. I hope you relate to what you hear and that you feel connected through the power of stories and gain a better understanding of pain and resilience, challenges, and triumphs. In This Family is presented by Nexus Family Healing, a national nonprofit mental health organization who helps youth and families heal from trauma and complex mental health challenges. We believe every child is worth it and every family matters. To start our season, I'm absolutely thrilled to bring you a conversation I had with Gary Gulman. Gary is many things: a wise voice on depression, a person who has lived through severe bouts of depression, a hero to people who have struggled, and he also happens to be one of the top names in stand-up comedy. He's appeared on every late-night show you could think of, plays big theaters across the country, and authored a memoir, Misfit, Growing Up Awkward in the 80s. One of his many comedy specials was especially significant, The Great Depression. It came out in 2019. The Great Depression details Gary's battle with depression, which dates back to his childhood. I know it doesn't sound like comedy material, but the special is very funny and very honest and moving. Gary's depression had been mostly kept at bay during his adult life, but he hit an especially bad crash when he was in his 40s. During this time, he was unable to work and unable to function, so for a time he moved back in with his mother at age 46, sleeping in his childhood bedroom. He even decided to give up comedy despite having a very successful career. Eventually, Gary started feeling better and put together that special, The Great Depression, which laid it all on the line and which was met with great reviews and huge success. Gary and I had a really interesting conversation about his family of origin, about his mental health, and about the healing he has found with people who love him. I do want to make a note to listeners. This interview does contain mention of suicidal ideation and other sensitive topics. We reached Gary at his home in New York City. It's a busy place, so you may hear some background noise or the occasional siren. I am here joined today by Gary Gulman. Gary, welcome to In This Family. It's great to have you.
I'm thrilled to be here. Thank you.
Maybe let's start with the youngest memories you have as a child of, children don't understand what's happening. They think it's just normal. This is just how things are. They don't have the cognitive ability to think through things like you do as an adult. But can you recall as a child, what was your experience of depression without you knowing what it was? But just what were you feeling and thinking as a child? And then I'll have you talk more about the effect on your family and their effect on you. But let's start with your
Yeah,
experience as a child.
there was just this feeling that, oh, of course I don't feel very good about myself. I haven't done anything. I haven't graduated from college. I haven't gotten a good job, or I haven't been a star in sports, which were really revered. Athletes and sports in my hometown and within my family were really revered, and so it put a lot of pressure on me. And also I was very, very tall for my age, or for any age. I was very tall, so I was pushed into sports, and I enjoyed sports, and I was competitive, but I was also very hard on myself and very critical on my performance, and I equated success in sports with or my self-esteem was riding on it, and I didn't really understand how you got self-esteem. I didn't understand that you were entitled to self-esteem. I thought you got self-esteem by achieving things, and by winning games, and by making important shots or touchdowns or baseball plays. And so sports were enjoyable, and I advocate for participation in sports. It's a great way to be around people, and it's a great way to get exercise. But the toxic competitiveness and the relentless pursuit of, basically, you're winning a lottery if you ever make it to a professional sport, and yet people are dedicating their entire lives to preparing to win a lottery, and it can take away a lot of the joy. So my earliest feelings were of, I'm doomed, and I can undoom myself by achieving. And we were poor people, and that was a constant fear in our house, that we would lose our house, that we'd lose our heat, that all these things would happen, and nobody was really shielding me from that. And so I was aware of the anxiety that my family had over their financial situation, and I internalized it and felt like, well, if I need to save this family, I need to save my mother. I mean, my mother was a single mother, and my father was in my life for about 5 hours every week on Sundays. So it was a very dysfunctional setup in my house, and I remember thinking frequently that my life would probably end at my own hands, because I was constantly by my own hands, because I was constantly thinking, well, what if I do not make a lot of money as a professional basketball player? Or what if I don't get to college and get a good career? Then how am I going to feel about myself? I'm counting on being a success to feel good about myself, and potentially, so if I have a bad basketball game, well, that's the end of that. And I was so easily discouraged, and so it's funny looking back on it, but it was just so sad and heartbreaking when I think about it, that every day was a challenge for me to try and motivate myself and ward off the negativity and the critical thinking. And I found it very hard to make friends. I was very different from the kids I went to school with in terms of the way I talked, the way I thought, and I was very anxious around other kids. I didn't have many friends, and just so much time to be ruminating about my thoughts. So I I was capable of feeling very good. If I had a great game, I would be overjoyed, and I would think, oh, okay, I won't have to eventually kill myself because I'm going to be good. Things are going to work out. But then if they didn't, so I was just I was a wreck.
So you really had to disrupt that thinking cycle then throughout your treatment, I would imagine.
Oof. Yeah, I mean, I finally got to this point when I decided I did want to try and continue to do stand-up comedy, because I was convinced that I just didn't have the makeup to continue to do this thing that I'd been very successful at. I've been on all the television shows, and I had a successful touring career, but it wasn't enough, and to make me feel good about myself. And every night when I would get on stage, if the audience loved me, I loved me. If I didn't do well, I was devastated, and it was difficult to get out of bed the next morning. And then I made this conscious decision. I said, I'm going to go on stage, and no matter what the audience, how they react, it will not matter. As long as I'm prepared and I do my best. And I don't know how this clicked, because I had thought of this strategy for years, but then it was just that I was feeling well enough that my brain was working right, and there would still be tinges of disappointment after the show, but I would say I actually found this phrase or expression by Samuel Beckett, the playwright, and it's been co-opted by tech bros, but it's actually not a toxic idea, and it was the sentence was, ever tried, ever failed, no matter, try again, fail better. And that one phrase, fail better,
that's great.
I kept that as kind of a mantra. And I said, okay, I'll fail tonight. That'll be fine. But next time, I'll fail a little bit less. I'll be better about it. And I don't think it's a coincidence that it also sounds like feel better. And that was part of the answer. I mean, also the fact that I was exercising every day, and I had a medication that fit my chemistry. But I think that phrase was really helpful, because if you have your self-esteem dependent on things far beyond your control, then you're really vulnerable to the whims and the to things that are unpredictable.
I want to still go back to your childhood. Do you remember the earliest age, if you can recall, feeling like you thought you were different?
7.
7.
7.
Okay, was there something that happened?
Yeah,
that
there was
helped you bring that out?
There was a traumatic event, and it wasn't helpful. It made me so depressed. My father got it in his head that he wanted me to repeat the first grade, and despite the fact that I had done really well in the first grade, I was in all the top reading groups, and I remember the term marginally gifted, which sounds really almost like a backhanded compliment, but it meant like you were in like the 98th percentile of scores and things like this.
Yeah, that's high.
It was pretty good. And basically, if you can read and write and do some math, you get promoted to second grade. And yet my father got it in his head that I wasn't mature enough, even though I was, if anything, precocious. And he decided
were your parents married at this time?
No.
They were divorced?
My father,
okay.
My father only had me for 5 hours a week.
Okay.
And at this point, he was unfamiliar enough to me at that time where I was still a little bit afraid of him. I loved him and I felt safe around him, but I was still a little bit afraid of him. And he made this decision, and the school and then the superintendent, they pushed back, and he insisted, and somehow they relented. and I repeated the first grade, and it was just it was awful. I think it could have been manageable if I had a teacher who was kinder. It turned out I just had the worst, cruelest teacher I've ever intersected with in my life, and it just that was the first year I ever had the suicidal ideation and the depressive symptoms and the not wanting to get out of bed and just the crying, and it was just such a nightmare of a year, and I felt the effects of that because there's this feeling that you get every year when the leaves turn in New England, and if you like school, you feel one way, and if you don't like school, you feel so much worse, and it just, so that was the onset of my depression, and I think I probably, just through family history, I probably had a higher propensity than the average person for depression or mental illness, but my psychiatrist was very clear when I brought it up with him, in terms of my wife and I having children, that it's not like eye color or hair color, whether your child is going to be depressed because you were depressed. It's no reason to not have children to protect them from that. So that was good news, and but also it exposed the fact that I probably was at least partially depressed because of circumstances and just irresponsible, careless parents.
Well, and you're really describing perfectly that your propensity for depression came out more because of the environmental factors.
Sure.
You had a propensity there, things are happening around you, it's going to draw that out. And when you talk about your parents, of not being responsible about this, maybe describe, I'm sure that as a kid, because most kids don't connect all those dots, you're crying, you don't want to go to school, you're
right.
having all of these things, you're feeling bad, you're not having friends, you're feeling lonely. Did you connect dots at all to what was going on around you to that? And then what were your parents, could your parents see anything that was going on for you?
No, it's funny because it's interesting because it almost reminds me of allergies, which people will say is much more common now than it was back then, and I think it was probably just as common, but people weren't as likely to connect the dots back then, and in order to connect the dots, I think people would have had to been more familiar with depressive symptoms.
Yes.
But also a lot more aware of their children than most parents were back then. My parents were my dad was greatest generation, and my mom was 15 years after that. So they were the children were they were better than most people from that era and generation, but they were not as focused. They were the opposite of the helicopter parents. They spoke to me, but they didn't know me that well, the way parents know their parents now, and the way it almost felt like it was your job to know your parents back then, because you might get hit. There might be violence if you didn't know what would set off your parents. I mean, I hear a lot of that from friends and people in my age group, that you really had to mind your P's and Q's with your parents, because even though Spock had written his book saying that it is not helpful to hit your kids, there still are today parents who insist that that's the way to discipline, and it's a way to discipline, but there are obviously better ways, and so I probably wasn't hit more than any other kid, but I don't think that was really a significant part of my parents' a toolkit for disciplining me, but there was all kinds of fear and we'll never forgive you, and it goes. The other thing they had on their side was God. This is a sin, and all these things. So my mind was just riddled with all kinds of fears and insecurities, it's very interesting. I know they did the best they could, but it was except for read a single book about parenting like they clearly didn't do the best they could, and now it's our job to figure out how we can reconcile our parents' irresponsibility and mistakes and find forgiveness and things. But it just, there were parents who probably would have been able to figure out what was going on with their kid, but nobody was, to answer the question that we started with, nobody was connecting any dots, and I didn't even think of the connection between my mental illness and that 1 year until I started seeing the therapist I see now. I started seeing him at 36, and when I told him how my dad had made me repeat the first grade, he explained to me how undermining that was, and that it had an effect that I had dismissed, and I was lucky that my dad was still alive, and I brought it up with him, and he apologized, and that made me feel really, really good that he took some responsibility for it, and he didn't, and other people in my family would just say, well, get over it. But my father was actually a very, very accountable man with great compassion and values. So in that way I was fortunate, but a lot of the damage had been done.
As a kid, what's the biggest thing that your parents might have missed?
So I did first grade twice.
Yep.
So the first time through first grade, I never missed a day, and I never wanted to stay home sick. And the second time through first grade, there was a period where I went to the nurse's office every day for days and weeks trying to get sent home. And then I had these stomach pains, which now I know is some sort of form of gastritis or something caused by stress and anxiety. And even the pediatrician wasn't able to pick up on anything. So these were the types of things that made me think this was so obvious that this kid was in crisis, and nobody was picking up on the signals.
And while they may not have ever been able to say, "Oh, Gary's depressed," they just weren't even picking up on something's not right.
That I wasn't myself. But also, the other thing is, it's possible that I put on such a good show because depressive people can do that, and once you're away from the catalyst for your misery, which was the teacher and school, you feel a little bit better on the weekends, but then as soon as it's time to go to school again, you're begging not to be sent back to school. So it's just almost a willful denial, it feels like. But then again, it doesn't surprise me at all that they weren't able to pick up on it, because I didn't really pick up on it.
Yeah, right. You described this idea of you had to be much more attuned to your parents than they were attuned to you.
Yeah.
And you mentioned that was a very generational thing. So imagine parents right now listening to this. What advice would you give them? What would they want to watch for in their child? What do they need to be attuned to? What kind of symptoms were you displaying? That they may want to say, hey, I need to be attuned to this, and this could mean X, Y, Z.
That's a great question. I mean, one thing I always say to parents, because I will frequently have parents who bring a child to my show, and the child will either say that the Great Depression resonated. They don't usually use the word resonated, but they make it clear that I made them feel less alone. And then the parents will say something, what can we do, and how can we help our child? And I always say, my God, you are so far ahead of of most everyone, in that your child feels comfortable sharing this with you, and your child is so lucky to have somebody who is advocating for them and understands them, and isn't telling them to get over it, or comparing their life to the child's life and saying they have nothing to be depressed about and things like that. My father never did this, but I remember when I talked with a friend who was had struggled with substance abuse and things like that, and he said that he grew up, and anytime he would complain, his parents or grandparents would say, "Are there Nazis at the door? If there are no Nazis at the door, what are you complaining about?" And I thought, right. Oh my gosh, it's just, oh my gosh. But so what I'm saying is that if you have a diagnosis and you are with your child for the appointments, and you're doing everything you can, you should be proud of yourself. But the other thing I will say is, one thing that is an under discussed symptom is that you don't enjoy things that you really used to look forward to. So if you find your child not wanting to go to karate or basketball or soccer or their music lessons, or that the child wants to sleep a lot, or that and these don't have to mean depression, but they are subtle symptoms that you can kind of, they're obvious. Your child doesn't want to go to school, your child doesn't want to go to soccer practice anymore, your child stops drawing like they used to draw, or reading like they used to read. It may mean nothing, but it's a good thing to discuss. And then the other thing is a little more obvious. If there's a lot of crying, or a lot of anger, or a lot of silence, or a lot of and then there's also the component where there that I didn't suffer from, but there are also things of mania, and one of my biggest ones was anxiety, and that can be as simple as grinding your teeth, or I remember I was biting my lip all the time, and I still have to catch myself. I do this all the time, when I'm anxious, my lip juts out, and there are all these little tics that can be indicative. You don't want to make it so that you're being critical of your child. I mean, my father was a type of dad who would say, "Stop sticking your lip out and stop hunching your shoulders," and that's that generation. But in a lot of cases, this was anxiety or nerves.
It was a sign.
And yeah, it was a sign, and they were unaware, and they were looking to correct it rather than understand it. So it's just I'm more optimistic about the future of the young people, because more than ever their parents are aware and involved and understand and are less judgmental, and I think that's just the way my wife has been so helpful in my recovery. A parent is even better, and especially if it's founded at a young age, and because the teen years and the early 20s can be so arduous for a kid who's unprepared. So to get to get a handle on it younger is so beneficial.
One of the great things about a show like this is it really helps people who are experiencing things relate. Try to describe for people what are the feelings and the thoughts, like how was your depression manifested for you?
Part of it was the fatigue and the energy required to do even the most basic day-to-day things, like taking a shower, brushing my teeth, making meals for myself, felt overwhelming. Like my wife is significantly shorter than me. She's not a short person, but I'm 6'6", and we would walk together just a couple of blocks, and I could not keep up with her. The pace was too much for me, and a walk with my dogs around the block felt like what I imagine a mountain climber, a novice mountain climber feels while climbing a mountain, and it just, so that was part of it. Also, I had a lot of rumination where I would think terrible thoughts, negative thoughts about myself, critical thoughts about myself, and
like what? Like describe a couple of them.
Sure. The reason I felt so bad was that I was a horrible person and that I was unsuccessful, which was not objectively true, but I was unsuccessful, and also it was my fault because I was so lazy and so talentless and unskilled, and I was doomed. I had bad luck, and it was only going to get worse. And even if I did feel better someday, I would be so caught up in the regret over wasting all this time that I wouldn't be able to recover. And it just, what was even the point of getting better? I mean, I think that's one of the interesting things about my recovery is that I spend very little time thinking about what I could have I spend no time thinking about what I could have accomplished without this illness, and that was always my fear, that I would never be able to get over the time that I had lost, and it didn't require many strategies to figure that out. Your body feels like itself, your body and your brain feels well, and it doesn't draw you back and spend time thinking of what might have been, and that's that would have been good to know, that there was a point to getting better, and I guess I could have asked about it, but it never came across. And so part of what I feel like I'm doing at this point in my life, even if I don't mention how I'm feeling or that I've recovered from something, people can tell that I am feeling well, and that I am experiencing joy, and I'm energetic and enthusiastic, and a source of light. So I've become sort of a model through my behavior that there is another side of depression, that you can recover, and not just recover but thrive. I've really thrived in the past several years, and there's always that with the artists. There's always that myth that an artist is not creative unless they are suffering, unless they have some misery to draw on. But I've been dramatically more creative than I ever was. I have all the suffering I need to draw on for portrayals of suffering from my existence, and now it's helpful to have the energy and the belief in myself to write, and so those are some of the manifestations. I would sleep for 12 hours and not be rested. My doctor once pointed out that, or explained that, a lot of psychiatrists refer to depression as faux dementia, and so you lose a lot of cognitive ability, and also memories don't adhere to your brain as well when you're impaired with depression, and so the thing is that the electroconvulsive therapy, everybody is afraid that they lose memory. Well, you lose a lot of memories from having depression.
Good point.
Yeah.
Good point.
There are things that I can't remember, and it had nothing to do with the electroconvulsive therapy. It was before I even had the ECT. It was because my brain wasn't working right, and so I think everybody it's up to them to make their own decision. But I will say that I remain an advocate for that treatment as being very, very effective in getting out of depression and anxiety.
You had brought up your wife before,
Mm-hmm.
and so let's focus a little bit on that. I want to understand from you how your depression has affected your marriage, your wife. Talk a little bit about the experience that you guys have had to share around your depression.
Yeah, so the first 6 months of my relationship with my wife, we were not married, of course, at the time. We had a wonderful time. We spent all our free time together, and she would come to my shows and travel with me. And I remember we went on a vacation together, and it was sheer bliss. And then I fell into this episode that lasted for 2.5 years, and after 6 months, after a year, then it starts to become me it became me trying to convince her to cut her losses and leave. And because I felt so bad, I was like, you didn't sign up for this. And the one great thing she said, I said, why would you stick by me through this? We had 6 good months, and then this. And she said, well, it was a really good 6 months. And that made me really happy. And it was the exact right answer. But I mean, all along she was aware, even from when we first started dating. I told her, and I've always been very upfront about my condition, and that it gets bad, but for the most part it's manageable, and it lasts at most 3 months of the year, and even then I'm highly functional. I'm able to make a living and pay my bills and everything. And then this got into a situation where I remember later on my wife saying there were times where I was like, oh, it was like you were dying. I was just spending so much time, either when I was awake, I was in agony, and just it was so hard to watch. And so she did a number of things. She went to every appointment I had and asked questions, did
That's
research.
Incredible.
So that was incredibly helpful, that I had this person who believed in my recovery, or didn't believe in it but never let me know that she didn't believe, that she had lost hope. And we just kept trying different treatments. And she visited me every day when I was in the hospital, and I had a few other friends who visited me when I was in the hospital. And the interesting thing that I would say, and this isn't for everyone, but I know that one of the anxieties about mental illness is keeping your mental illness a secret. And I've found that can be one of the anxieties you can dispense with. You can tell everyone who's close to you who will understand, and relieve that anxiety, because if anything, it made people closer to me, and it strengthened my friendships. I can't think of anyone who was scared away by it. Some people said the wrong thing, and that's fine. I can get over that. But nobody said I can't abide by this person being mentally ill. I mean, we've come so far in terms of this stigma.
I know your wife's not here to speak for herself, but do you know what she would perhaps say got her through it? What was she doing to help herself get through the support she was offering you?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, one thing is she did go to, there was a friends and family component to the mood disorder support group, so you could go and talk with people like that. But also there was a lot of research, and she actually she taught herself to code while I was sick, and created an app. So I think part of the thing is to not make your partner's life entirely your life, and to have some other things to do while your partner is sleeping and curled up in a fetal position. But so I think that was very healthy. But that's an important component of it, and I know that she's been very generous in talking to people about how she coped with that. But it was scary for her, and it can make you feel very, very powerless. But I think part of the way she was taking some power back was she did a lot of research that I wasn't even aware of, and reading up on things and asking questions.
Good for her.
She has a great curiosity about all things, but in particular, when we would go to visit my doctor, she would ask questions, and it relieved me, because I grew up thinking the doctor knows everything, and to question the doctor is to be disrespectful. And she was never disrespectful. She was just asking questions, and a good doctor is happy to answer these questions. And it really also, when one person is asking questions, then you feel comfortable asking questions on your own. So it's such a great icebreaker, and I couldn't have drawn up and requested a better partner and advocate for me during the recovery.
So, Gary, I understand that at one point when you were really deep in the depression, you decided to move back in with your mom.
Yes.
And so can you talk to us a little bit about how it was with your mom during that time, and how was it different with her as an adult living at home with depression versus when you were a child, and how she was handling that?
My mother was never really equipped to handle my depression. I could never make her understand how it felt, and I gave her a book one time, but I think the book was really over her head. It was a little bit sophisticated, and so my mother almost was. It was helpful in that it relieved me of the financial obligation to pay rent in New York City every month, and it was nice to be around my mom, who was very loving and kind. But there were also things that kind of reminded me of how I got into this position when I moved back there. Is that it reminded me of what the house was like, that it could be very, very lonely, and my mother is much more comfortable watching television than really getting to know me or talking, and so that was just something that it made me understand a little bit better. But it was a safe place to recover, and I think the more important thing was that I was around some friends, and I was in a comedy community where when I started to do comedy again, where I could be with people who were very supportive and very nurturing and patient with me, and there was no pressure to be really good at comedy. They were just happy to see me, and that was really nice. And my mother enjoyed my company, and I enjoyed her company, but it was the other people in my neighborhood, and the fact that I wasn't in the city, and it gave me a little bit more peace.
Well, Gary, this has been absolutely a thrill and a treat, and wonderful talking to you. I feel like I could just talk for hours about some of the things that you brought up. It's just been wonderful.
Thank you. It was a pleasure to talk to you too, and hopefully I can help you out again in the future.
You can find Gary online at GaryGulman.com. His special, The Great Depression, is available on HBO Max. In This Family is produced by John Moe. Music provided by Jeremy Messer-Smith. You can learn more about Nexus by visiting nexusfamilyhealing.org. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, we hope you recommend In This Family to family and friends. Post about us on social or leave a rating or review. I'm Dr. Michelle K. Murray. See you next time.